We should talk about cheap phones. Next to housing and food and transportation, our smartphones are probably our most important expenses, and probably also one of the bigger ones. So here are 5 reasons why you should consider owning a cheap phone. Number 1, you obviously save a lot of money, right? The other day I stumbled across my old iPhone SE here. It's a first generation one, which by now is 8 years old. First of all, it's wild how tiny it is. We get so used to much bigger phones. And I plugged it in and it still works, albeit with quite a weak battery, especially when you do anything demanding like photo, video and stuff. But it still works fine for all the basics like phone calls, text messages, browsing, listening to music and so on. And the thing is, you can pick up a first generation iPhone SE for about 35 euros. And if you can make it work for your use case for, let's say, another year, and then maybe pick up an old iPhone 8 for 50 euros and continue that process every year, your total cost of ownership for a 3-year period would be around 150 euros. In fact, I've done a whole video about iPhone cost of ownership. The link is somewhere here. And there I calculated that buying the new flagship iPhone Pro model every year and selling it after that year before buying the next new one would cost you around 1,300 euros for a 3-year period. So there's an enormous difference of 1,150 euros or 32 euros a month. And even if 7-8-year-old phones are too extreme for you, totally understand that, buying something like a second generation iPhone SE from 2022 for around 250 euros, maybe adding in a new battery for 79 euros, then use it for 3 years before selling it for maybe 100 euros, would still only cost you 229 euros for 3 years, or 1,071 euros saved compared to buying a new Pro iPhone every year. With that saved amount, you could probably have a free vacation every 3 years, or put it into your hobbies, or simply save or invest it. If you hypothetically put that into an index fund following the S&P 500, for example, you could on average expect another 100 to 150 euros on top of our 3-year period. And even though I only talked about iPhones here because I've using them since forever and I've been closely following used prices for a long time, it obviously also applies to Android phones. In fact, buying cheaper or especially used Android phones makes even more sense as they tend to depreciate a bit faster than iPhones. So buying new flagship Android phones would cost you even more than buying new flagship iPhones. Number 2, diminishing returns. While our first example with the 8-year-old iPhone SE is a bit extreme, buying something relatively new like an iPhone 12 or a Google Pixel 6a or a Samsung S21 Fan Edition makes your life a lot easier and is still quite cheap. And that's the thing, spending at least double or even triple will not give you a 2 or 3 times better experience, right? That's what we call diminishing returns. Sure, every aspect of your phone will be a bit worse compared to a brand new flagship model. That's the camera, the screen, the processing power, graphics especially, maybe battery, build quality, like what kind of materials are used. But does it really matter on a day-to-day basis? That brings me to number 3. Do you really need flagship features? When talking about the phones I mentioned a moment ago, they all have very nice OLED screens in case of the Samsung and the Google, also with high refresh rate of 120Hz, which will make everything feel super smooth, and you will certainly not notice any difference to a newer higher end model. For the camera, unless you're really into photography and especially videography, you will not really miss anything compared to the flagships. Trust me, I'm a professional photographer and I've used the iPhone 12 as well as a much older Google Pixel 3a, and the image quality that is coming out of these devices is phenomenal. Like absolutely enough for your holiday snaps and selfies. Going to something like a new iPhone 15 Pro, you gain things like recording in ProRes and log, being able to capture raw images, and if you don't immediately shout out, yeah, I need that because so and so, then you probably don't need those features, right? Then there's the performance, and in my opinion, the only time where you will feel a real difference here is gaming, especially more demanding titles. But then again, most people don't game that much on their phones, right? And rather spend the time on various social media apps. And it's not like you can't game more demanding titles on those phones, but they will run a little less smooth and maybe drain your battery a bit faster. And then the last big differentiator is build quality and materials. Higher end phones tend to use more premium materials like stainless steel or magnesium or titanium, glass and so on. while cheaper phones are mostly made out of plastics. And as you constantly touch and hold your phone, this might be relevant, but then again, most people put their nice flagship phone in some kind of cheap plastic case anyway, so that's that. And that brings me straight to reason number 4. Less value equals less anxiety. You see, I've always found it a bit strange to pay extra for more expensive materials in your phone only to then put it in a cheap case and never actually feel your precious titanium or stainless steel device. And I somewhat have the opinion that when you are so afraid to damage your expensive phone, maybe it was too expensive in the first place. Anyway, with a cheap phone definitely comes the advantage of having much less anxiety regarding your phone being stolen, damaged or whatever. And that can be very liberating, especially when you are somebody who, has a history, a track record of, losing, breaking their phones. And as a bonus, plastic used in cheap phones is often even more durable and less delicate than, for example, glass on more premium products. And number 5, less time on social media. Last but not least, when you own a very cheap and old phone, chances are that your experience of scrolling through social media apps is a bit less enjoyable, or you simply don't have a good enough battery to get lost on TikTok for 3 hours straight when traveling. And that can be a good thing, because obviously most of us are somewhat addicted to these apps, and the average adult uses them for about 2.5 hours every day, which is a lot. And I already made a video about opportunity cost of social media. Link is somewhere here on the screen. But it's just like you are less likely to drive recklessly in a 60 horsepower Polo versus a 700 horsepower Ferrari, right? And when you spend an hour less on social media because of your mediocre phone and instead maybe work on a side hustle or spend more time with friends and family, it's a real win in my book. Well, that's it for today. I hope you liked it, and if so, please consider subscribing. Thank you so much and have a nice day. Bye bye.